Because what Galileo saw in the sky and revealed to everyone who was willing to look was that the Ptolemaic heavens simply would not work. That Copernicus's powerful guess had been right and now stood open and revealed. And like many more recent scientific results, that did not at all please the prejudice of the establishment of his day. Galileo thought that all he had to do was to show that Copernicus was right, and everybody would listen. That was his first mistake. The mistake of being naive about people's motives, which scientists make all the time.
Remember the movie with Jack Nicholson as the Marine guy in Guantanamo?
You can't handle the truth.
That's right. You can't handle the truth. The people cannot handle the truth. You're going too fucking fast, right?
So you're suggesting...
Pause. Phil, I have to bring this up as a note to Scott. You can't handle the truth. That's going to be the opening to this session here, I think.
I got so excited about the political, religious stuff here and all the parallels with today, with all these flat earthers and all this stuff, and people think that the flat earth is pro-God. There's just no connection. You realize that? People think that the spherical earth theory is designed to make children atheists. It doesn't make any sense. Anyway, so I didn't get to make this video. So tonight's going to be very, kind of short, I guess. But anyway, what were we going to say, Phil?
Yeah, I was going to say that I like this program, but I think he made some mistakes. And his mistake was that the Greeks didn't know that the earth was round, and that they also had a theory of the sun-centered universe. As a matter of fact, it was Aristarchus of Manos, 310 BC to 230 BC, who pointed this out.
Thank you, Phil. Hello, David. Oh, you look sinister there for a second. You looked like Donald Sutherland. Donald Sutherland, 1974. Just for a second. How's it going?
Pretty sinister. I'll try not to be that bad today.
How'd I change my name from you to Phil? Oh, you guys could call me.
We all see Phil.
That's fine.
Use universal Zoom sign language.
Easter Island is over 1,000 miles from the nearest inhabited island, which is Pitcairn, straight over the volcano, over 1,500 miles from the next island, which is over there, which is where the original for Robinson Crusoe was stranded. Distances like that cannot be navigated unless you have a model of the heavens, of star positions, by which you can tell your way. People often ask about the Easter Islands, how did men come here? They came here by accident. That's not the question. The question is, why could they not get off? And they could not get off because they did not have a sense of the movement of the stars by which to find their way. Why not? Well, one obvious reason is that there is no pole star in the southern sky.
Well, that was my little clip, and I was thinking, what were they thinking? You know, this stranded inhabitants of Easter Island. You know, they're not bird brains, and I preface that with my next point because what he's actually going to be referring to is not a pejorative meaning of bird brain, but it's not meant to in any way demean the intelligence of this mysterious population, but it's really a reference to Brunelleschi's point that in the southern hemisphere, it lacks a model of navigation because of the absence of a pole star. Now, this is one theory, I would suppose, but it's not a complete theory. And I really like Brunelleschi actually openly admits that he doesn't know that there is a gap. There's a fissure, right? There is some incomplete knowledge. And I like that. I like that admission, and it just kind of telling that we admit what we don't know and we assert what we do know. And bravo and hats off to this class act. So I like that.
Is it only nautical navigation that induces decent astronomy, or can land navigation also induce it? That's a historical question, I guess. But anyway, when you learn this in school, they always talk about it's being on the sea. I guess because there's no landmarks on the sea, right? Everything is flat.
You definitely needed a factor, an order of magnitude more when you're surrounded by no landmark whatsoever. Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, you have to find a way to say, where am I, and start to answer that with stars above and water below. So that's a different problem than who are these people and what are they saying now? There you have a chance of help.
That's right. Yeah.
Well, but it's like some more contemporary thought is that it's not only the stars, but the Polynesian and Micronesian people also had a very sensitive understanding of waves, stream flows, and sort of air movements. So, like, yes, it might be an exception because Easter Island is very, very far away from the small islands that they could sail and understand the waves and all that kind of stuff. So that could be a factor. How far is Easter Island from South America?
I don't know, but you're absolutely right. They were navigating thousands of miles through the Pacific, merely by knowing the wave patterns and recognizing the currents and understanding what was happening, I suppose, in the sky. And I don't know the distance. He's suggesting it was a bit beyond their range, but their range was huge. And they didn't, as far as I know, use stars.
I got a factoid that is probably completely irrelevant, but I heard that there was some research about the decayed remains of dental fragments of people from Easter Island, and apparently there was like a cane sugar that was on the island, and they had seriously rotted teeth. I have no idea why that would be relevant, but my other point was just that I wonder why, like, psychologically, the blank stare of those monuments of people, like they kind of look eerie. But I mean, eerie to me, I can recognize that that's some sort of a projection. But what is it about this, like, blank stare into the abyss, or is that what everybody else kind of gets? Like, what do you guys think about these?
They look eerie to me now because Bronowski said that they look eerie. He said that this is the art of a people who are stuck, who have no navigation, and I think it's just placebo effect. But my favorite part about this beginning is that he just skips over what the History Channel will be interested in today, and what Leonard Nimoy cared about in the early 70s, which is, how did they make these gigantic things? It must have been aliens. It must have been some magical technology. Bronowski just throws that whole idiot issue away, and he says the real puzzle isn't how do you make large stone things, because the answer is you do it inch by inch using masses of slaves. The real question is, why the hell do these people never get off the island? I thought that was hilarious. You'd never hear something like that in the History Channel, where they're always babbling about UFOs and ancient bullshit. So
I think that in part, I think when they first came to Easter Island, it was actually quite lush. Okay, and so life was actually good. So at the beginning, things were okay. They did worship the gods. I'm sure that must be the case. And I think what happened was that because they worshiped the gods, I think that these monuments may have started when the island was still quite lush. And what happened is it became a competition. This is one of the theories says competition, like, because there was actually several groups. They may have came from the same group, but divided in several groups. It was a competition of who could, in a sense, praise God more. And I think maybe after a while, because they didn't sail that much, because life was good, why go anywhere else? They might have lost their knowledge of sailing, in addition to the fact that there wasn't a star to guide them. The knowledge of reading the seas and the flow of the currents and so forth. So that could be part of it. And what happened is that they had such a competition of building that to a certain degree, they used up the resources, and in a sense, and they began to cannibalize each other to a certain degree, that at least some degree, and it became a kind of violent culture. But I think it started to be a worship, and it could be that they just simply thought, we're here, and the gods seem to know something, and those might be worshiping figures, because Baraski said they were staring at the sky. I'm not sure if that's proved. A lot of them are staring at the sky, but I'm sure not. Maybe not all of them are staring at the sky. I don't know, but I think there is something about the gods know the mysteries, and we have lost it, and we have to pray to the gods. So that tradition is old. I mean, primitive people did believe, how could all this stuff be without some creator? So
yeah, we have a lot of speculative room here. It could also be that these were put up at times of stress in their civilization. Like in the Middle East, there would be fast when there wasn't enough rain. So it might be when there were bad years that they would start to build one of these monstrous heads. And I don't find the expression clearly anything. I mean, maybe it's, just awe.
Yeah, it could be nobility, right? When you see a stone face like that, like remember the advertisements for the what was that thing that I lived in New York City for a while, and everyone put something in their steering wheel to keep the car from getting stolen. What was that thing called?
The club.
Oh, yeah.
The club. Yeah. So you remember this ridiculous advertising for the club? It was a really angry cop with a 1,000-yard stare. So he wasn't zoned out. He was just on, like most cops, he was on cocaine and wanted to hurt someone. So yeah. It could have been these could be noble brows, or these could be masculine kind of aggressive brows. Who knows? Dave thinks.
If you were staring at the Pacific 24/7, show me what face you would end up with after a while. I mean, this is just you're staring out into the infinite. What expression could you hold? I don't know.
All right. Here's the next clip.
I think that they lacked that great dynamic image which so moved the old world, the wheel. The wheel was only a toy in the new world. But in the old world, it was the greatest image of poetry and science. Everything was founded on it. This sense of the heavens moving round their hub, which inspired Christopher Columbus when he set sail in 1492. He had it from the Greeks, who believed that the stars were fixed on spheres which made music as they turned. Wheels within wheels. That was the system of Ptolemy that had worked for over 1,000 years. 100 years before Christopher Columbus set sail, the old world was able to make this superb clockwork of the starry heavens. It was made by Giovanni de Dondi in Padua about 1350. It took him 16 years to make, but more than the mechanical marvel is the intellectual conception, which comes from Aristotle and Ptolemy and the Greeks, which is the view of the planets as seen from the Earth. From the Earth, there are 7 planets. The Sun, Mars, notice that its motion is running on a clockwork wheel inside a wheel. Jupiter, more complex wheels within wheels. Saturn, wheels within wheels. Then we come back to the moon. Isn't she delicious? To Mercury, and finally to Venus. And again, the same picture, the wheel that carries Venus turns inside a larger hypothetical wheel. It's a marvelous intellectual conception, very complex, but that only makes it more marvelous that in 150 AD, not long after the birth of Christ, the Greeks should have been able to conceive and put into mathematics this superb construction. Then what is wrong with it? One thing only, that there are 7 dials for the heavens, and the heavens must have one machinery, not 7. But that machinery was not found until Copernicus put the sun at the center of the heavens.
So you guys, I got a couple questions here. I hope you can help me out with this. The wheel within the wheel that they have, where the center of the inside wheel is offset, actually makes an ellipse of sorts. So in terms of the functionality of the way that the spiral part of the mechanical piece works, would that, you guys get that?
No, yes. I didn't get that, but I understand what you're saying.
That's the point. The point of the 2 wheels is to make an ellipsis when they didn't know that. 2 things. It's an ellipse, and the second is that the Earth isn't actually at the center. So you have to add wheels within wheels to adjust to approximate what's actually happening.
Right. Okay, so that's the other thing, and the beauty here.
But Dan, if the 2 circles don't have the same turning period, you don't get an ellipse.
Mm.
If they turn at different rates, because the gears would, I think, do that, you would get a backwards forwards motion, which would be a different thing. And that shape has an evolution of 2 shapes like that gives you something else. And it also gives you the backwards motion of the planets in the sky for the planets that we see in retrograde motion.
But I think this is not necessarily going back to religion. I mean, it could be.
So let me go on with the point here, because on that clip, it's really important. That point that I wanted to make is that it was the fusion between poetry, the wheel was captured in the imagination, and he's making that distinction between old world, new world, right? And the advancement of science was coupled to the poetry and the imagination, sitting eye to eye with science. That to me that's amazing. It captivates our imagination.
They had to get very clever using only circles, because only circles were perfect, and yet the motions that they had to predict didn't work out that way.
Yeah, no, I think that's a better point than the religion, because I think the Greeks would try. In other words, they were already caught in a kind of ideology, right? Because Pythagoras saw certain geometries as like fundamental and all that, and everybody knows that it is. I mean, at least at that time, and so therefore you got to work it out in relationship to what your mathematics and geometry is already telling you. So in that sense, it's kind of like we might be trapped in the same ideology, because we have a certain mathematics that predicts certain things. Now, maybe we're a little bit more adaptable. It took only a couple hundred years for Einstein to come up with a new idea that it isn't really the gravity. It was really the curvature of space, which is a completely different idea in a sense that space itself is distorted. So in some sense, they're caught more by the idea, earlier knowledge that, okay, I'll admit that it's kind of poetic, because they created this understanding and it seemed to fit perfectly, until they proved that it wasn't quite perfect, right? And so even the simplicity of the sun-centered universe doesn't overcome the perfection of all the math and everything else, in addition to religion, that would explain what's going on. So it's hard to give up your thought that's already there. So, by the way, he also did not. I don't think he knew about what is this device called, the thermic device. They discovered.
The
what?
An orrery?
No. They discover a device, at one off the Greek islands that was a lot smaller and incredibly complex, way more complex than the mechanical devices of Europe, even after the Middle Ages. And that really talked about this movement of the stars and everything else. And there was even a lever that they didn't discover for a long time, that they had to push another lever for another gear to pop up that was kind of hidden. And it's like, some people speculate that it might have came from the mind of Archimedes, but they don't know. Okay. But
I agree with Phil's idea that to a degree, we can see them as constricted by an ideology, which may come from Pythagorean thinking about solving everything in rigidity. But then again, we also kind of fall in that framework. And the reason that Einstein adopted his theory of gravity was because he put geometry as more fundamental, a way to understand what was going on than anything else in mathematics. So he wanted a geometric explanation of the numbers he was saying. So he turned his analysis into a geometric analysis all over again.
There was a pre-Socratic philosopher that's in the Pythagorean school that but it's not talked about very much, who had a very interesting idea. He says the world is divided into what he called, the limits and the unlimited. There's a rough translation. And there's actually two worlds, and he says they penetrate each other, and that's how you come with something. And what happened is that's not random. And what the limits is a way of speaking that has something to do with mathematical proportions. So that comes from Pythagoras, right? But there's also the unlimited, which is that it is beyond the numbers, at least as we know yet. And therefore, we could not describe the structure of that, but it has a structure, and that structure is very deep within that, in a sense, that we could somehow get to a better understanding of the border between the limit and unlimited. You would be able to expand your understanding more into the unlimited, rather than just being stuck within an already known and limited parabola of understanding. So that was Phileas of Crichton, 470 BC to 385 BC, a contemporary of Socrates, and one of the principal speakers for the Pythagorean school. So he was already striking a compromise that is very much like Taoism. Like, there is the known and there's the unknown, and the unknown has this fear of knowing, and then it constricts. But you also have the unknown, I suppose you could say. That is where imagination, creativity, and poetry comes in, to try to expand a kind of understanding into that. And perhaps eventually, and which we did, we would develop a more refined mathematics, such as calculus, that will explain other things that we did not understand before, and we expand the limited understanding we already slowly into the unlimited. And it's not like expanding outwards, because the unlimited penetrates into the limited. And so therefore you have to look inside as well, such as not only calculus, but infinitesimal calculus, right? So I think that guy has a deeper understanding of the universe, because he already understands that understanding only understand what it understands.
There's a Kantian moment for you. Thanks, Phil. So speaking of the enchanted days of yore, I found some images here of what things were like when the Earth was at the center, and people lived in this pretty fantasy of correspondences, where and this is the climax right here. So as you know, in the old view, you had these crystalline shells. Well, for a while they were shells. After a while, like I guess Anaximenes said that the planets wafted around like leaves, that they were lightweight and they floated around. But for a while, these were crystalline shells, and in them were embedded the planets were like stones, and these things were rotating. And the final sphere was the fixed stars, and then outside of that was God and the angels. And so when a soul was created, it was created outside the spheres, and then it would fall down, and it would pick up a flavor as it penetrated down through the shells until finally it landed on Earth and it was inside a woman's womb. So as it traversed down the shells, it picked up the qualities of Saturn, Jupiter, and then Mars. Let's see, 6 is and then Sun, Venus, Mercury, Moon. And then once you get below the moon, then you're in entropy and things dissolve and everything is mortal. But above the moon is a superlunar realm where time doesn't affect and corrode things. And then in the earth, plants and minerals and animals were also correlated with these outer energies. So finally, you get a picture where everything is connected to everything, and it's just a lovely, non-alienating, enchanted, spiritualized vision. And here's the picture of it right here. I thought I'd share that. So it wasn't just, I guess maybe it was, well, like Phil said, you had these artisans making these incredible, complicated machines, and I guess it must have been depressing for them to realize that their machines were wrong. I mean, 'cause I'd rather have one of those machines in my home than have a heliocentric machine, because I like the complexity. I think it's attractive and beautiful. And there's a scene from Dark Crystal, the Jim Henson movie. Remember, there's the wizard and there's a gigantic astrolabe. I guess I'm not sure what it's called, but it's one of the mechanical engines where it actually depicts the planets on arms and they move around, perfectly emulating. Anyway, I guess it's a fetish I have. All right, no. Anyway.
I think even the heliocentric ones are so complicated, they're just beautiful, with their moons going around each of the planets, right? You know, carrying their own orbits, and it's wonderful stuff.
Well, I think he also made a mistake when he sort of, in a way, downplayed the Mayans, because he said the New World never understood or developed the circle. Well, they never developed the wheel. They had a circle for the calendar. They had circles. But I think because they were so interested in the stars, and therefore in the mystery of how the stars, the heaven, is related to the earth, they were more interested in calculating in that relationship rather than doing something practical or useful. And the Western culture, the circle not only became an idea to, in a sense, manifest the relationship between heaven and earth in some sense, but it also became a chariot, became the whole mechanical civilization, because he left out the lever. I mean, it's incredible to think that the whole mechanical civilization is developed on only the lever and the wheel, the circle as a functioning rotating wheel. Okay, because you think about like an automobile. You have the piston which drives the lever down and it pushes the cam, and because the circle could be done in such a way that it's lopsided or has a little dent, it pushes certain thing up in a different speed than another thing. I mean, it's just incredibly how you could take an idea which is so fundamental. It's just a circle and a straight line and a lever, and you could develop such a complex culture. It's just incredible.
That's a good point. Yeah, the one simple rule of rotation and distance from the radius is enough to have like a Turing machine. It's like you can make a universal emulator just out of a rotating circle system, which I guess is what a Babbage engine is. Daniel?
So Phil, I just wanted to make a point that he doesn't completely throw the Mayans under the bus, so to speak, because earlier on he's actually gave a proper attribution to say that the Mayans are actually discovered the zero, or came up with the concept of zero prior to the old world. And
Well, maybe not before the Indians, though. I'm
Well,
not sure.
I don't know. It kind of seems
Independent, at least independent. Okay.
Yeah, I think the main focus here is on what manifested into like abstract marvels of what were what were captivated, and definitely there is kind of a trajectory that is a Western metaphysics, and then also our Western what Western philosophy is about, right? It definitely is like a scientific progress, right? Now, so I'll pause there, and then one of the comments that you made earlier about this infinitesimal to finite comparison, or the unknown known. Since we had David in the room, and he's I think probably by trade or practice he was a mathematician, or still is. I don't think he retires from that. What could you maybe, David, elaborate on quaternions? Because the way I understand them is they take calculations, they extend out, and then they come back down to the they kind of extend and then come back down. Is that kind of a good way to understand quaternions into that sort of infinitesimal sort of category?
Well, quaternions are a slightly different algebra than the one we normally use, because things that rotate in space, in three-dimensional space, don't commute like things we multiply, like numbers. So the way to represent them is with matrices or quaternions, which hold in them enough complexity so that you're manipulating something that has some substantial value, like its size, its magnitude, something scalar or invariant about it. But as it transforms and it conserves that property, so it's real, it has different orientations, and so it can react with other things based on its orientation. So it has properties that are represented in this algebra. So infinitesimal or not is a matter of magnitude, is something you have with regular numbers or with quaternions. So I think that's a useful concept. They can meld together, as far as I know. The thing that Phil was saying about the marriage of the wheel to locomotion as a utilitarian thing was that was his point about seeing it as a way that things move, which was what he attributes the Western culture's imagination to having that clue, and using that as the guidance to the stars and the moon and the motion of the planets and the earth being motive, being about motion, and circles helping them develop a theory of that dynamic. And without that, in the Mayans, using circles, but not using them for motion, they didn't have that jump.
Yeah. I'm sort of waiting for the time when he goes to Venice.
Here it comes, ready?
Because I want to, there's a very important point that he's making and also missing.
Okay.
All right, here's the next clip. But yeah, I'd like to reiterate what Dave just said. It was just the presence of the wheel as something in our ordinary life, and that's what allowed it to serve as a model to emulate the motion of the planets. Sure, the Mayans had a circle, and he even said they had a wheel, but they used it as a toy. But until the wheel becomes a part of the furniture of your like ready-to-hand experience that you're interacting with, it may not occur to you to use that as a model for something else.
Yeah.
A lot of things aren't concrete until you're like in them happening. It's like, crushing wheat and things like that.
Makes me wonder what kind of things now we have direct access to, but we're not tapping into. What's the, I'm not saying that it necessarily has to be the version of a circle, but like, is it right in front of us and we can't see it?
Nicholas Copernicus was a distinguished churchman and humanist intellectual from Poland. He had advised his government on currency reform and the Pope on calendar reform. For the last 20 years of his life, roughly, he devoted himself to the modern proposition that nature must be simple. Why were the paths of the planets so complicated? Because he decided, we look at them from the place where we happen to be standing, the Earth. Like the pioneers of perspective, Copernicus asked, why not look at them from another place? There are good Renaissance reasons, emotional rather than intellectual reasons, that made him choose the golden sun as the other place. So in 1543, at the age of 70, Copernicus finally braced himself to publish his mathematical description of the heavens, what he called De Revolutionibus Orbium Celestium, the revolution of the heavenly orbs, as a single system moving around the sun. The word revolution has an overtone now which is not astronomical, and that's not an accident. It comes from this time and this book.
I think that's such an important point. I got to hand it to him, because seeing the derivation of that word, I mean, it was just putting yourself in a different place. You could see the revolution. So it's in one sense not radical, in another sense radical, but now we see the revolution as like changing everything, but in fact is seeing a smoother path, which is sort of interesting the way he used that word. I mean, it's like that derivation of that word is like, yeah, what a change. And it was a revolution in that sense, right? Because he completely changed, at least in Europe at that time, the orientation.
Scott, you're muted.
Yeah, I like to point out also that I like that Bernowski pointed out the cheesy accident which made Copernicus right, which is the fact that with the sun we associate gold, and gold is the greatest of all the metals. It gets to survive no matter how many times you blend it and then precipitate it out. It never changes. It's incorruptible, and we wish to uncover our internal gold that makes us immortal. Mm-hmm. So that's associated with the sun, but it's not just an accident, because the sun is significantly different from other planets. So I mean, I guess it would be a good guess. If you were to pick one of those things in the sky to be the center, wouldn't you pick the one that was most exceptional? And the sun is most exceptional, so maybe it wasn't that bad. Not that bad of a guess.
Well, you think it was really a guess, though, Scott? Really?
What?
Was it really a guess? I wanted to hear more about it being a guess.
Well, he didn't know. He just guessed that the sun was the center.
Well, like I said, they didn't reveal that he knew that from the Greeks. And we think of the Greek as still flat earthers. No, they actually measured. They had a projection of how far the moon was. It was very accurate. They had a projection of how far the sun was in terms of distance. It was not as accurate, but it was amazingly interesting that it was quite far in relationship to what imagination could be.
Well, yeah, the Islamic guys. There was a book, Al-Haytham comes up very often. He'll come up again in this discussion, I think, who wrote Al-Shakuk al-Batalmus, because they don't have a P. His name is Batalmus. So it's about the doubt about the whole Ptolemean system, noting that geocentric predictions are inaccurate and that there are maybe better models, and the Earth may actually rotate, and that will improve, the system. And later on, like 200 years later, a guy, Al-Tusi, had arguments about the Earth being immovable, being strange to him, and the idea of falling bodies being like what the celestial bodies are doing. And also Al-Biruni was the great astronomer of the Islamic empires. He calculated the ideas of elliptical orbits as opposed to circular orbits, and he predicted that America's land masses on the other side of the Earth, because they knew the size of the Earth. So there's a lot of predicting going on. They knew how far away the sun was too.
Yeah, I wonder whether Bernowski actually, because he's so learned, whether he actually knew or didn't know that the Greeks had invented the sun-centered universe, or whether it was just a convenient way for him to tell the story, because like it happened at the correct time, according to his narrative, right?
Ptolemy was the doctrinal text, though. Mm-hmm. So you had this, geocentric stuff with equants, where things are off the center of their or they're on circles going around on their circles, and even the Earth that's in the middle is itself not in the middle; it's on a little circle going around the middle, which is also bizarre. That's what they actually had to do in order to get
motions to match up with the observations.
Well, and also depending on where you look. I mean, if you look at that, actually the Earth was the most exceptional place. So in one sense, you could say, well, it just makes sense that the Earth was the center of the universe. The sun would be second, and it's very important. And if you look at them as independent, that are sort of moving around the Earth, which just seems so obvious. I mean, it just seems innately obvious until you figure out it isn't obvious after all. That you know, they make the old mythologies make a big deal of the moon. I don't think they thought the moon was a reflection of the sun. It was just the second brightest thing. You know, it was like, so there was an order. The sun was masculine, the moon was feminine energy, and all that. So in that way of thinking, when you don't know the math, which reveals the parameter of knowing, then in a sense, it just makes sense in the other way of thinking. I mean, it's just like, so
the moon gets in the way of the sun.
Yeah, that's true.
Which like happened this morning.
Well,
and,
that's why they freak out.
And the moon gets shadowed over at times when it's on, in its orbit, but the sun never gets shadowed out. So the sun is so dominant for us. Had to be somewhere in the system. I mean, to realize how far away it is and how big it was, then you could start to think, well, that's, compared to us, that's a pretty big ball of fire.
Oh, well, you have to have emotional distance though, because if you saw the sun disappearing, then chaos is coming. The heaven is falling apart, right? So that's why that was like they would do anything to call the sun back. I mean, so in a sense, you have to kind of be a little cool to even think about, well, maybe it's something else instead of freaking out.
You got 4 minutes to freak. Yeah.
Well, now let's move into the Ptolemaic system, like David just said, is canonical. It's completely saturated popular culture, and for some reason, religious authorities think it doesn't make any sense to say that it buttresses or defends biblical cosmology, but it just became the standard, and so now we're entering the reaction phase here with this.
Maybe they had arguments about why it was necessary if you believed in the Bible. Maybe they had clues that they took out linguistically. It's a shame he doesn't say how it became the dogma.
Here we go.
That was not what bothered the man in the street or in the pulpit. They were committed to the wheel of the heavens. The hosts of heaven must march round the earth. That had become an article of faith, as if the church had made up its mind that the system of Ptolemy was invented not by a Levantine Greek, but by the Almighty himself. Clearly, the issue was not one of doctrine, but of authority. The issue did not come to a head until 70 years later in Venice.
It's like Citizen Kane, isn't it? Yes, these events that are causing such tumult. It's like, society is falling apart. And then here's Venice with its elegance and the gondolas and the beautiful horns in the harbor. It's incredible.
That's well. That now I'm curious. I wonder if they really did hammer out some strong seeming links between the Ptolemaic model and Scripture. That's a really good question.
I mean, he points to the idea of creation being about man on the seventh day, so it has to be the earth that is the point of creation. So everything must be, that's where he's saying the hierarchy is defined according to the biblical story to point at earth.
All right.
So maybe it's a compatibility story then, Scott. Maybe it's just, okay, that's enough. We'll take enough of that, but we don't want to confuse the people here,
Yeah.
Yeah, that happens a lot. Religious apologists are always working to take the best current models and say, look, this dovetails perfectly with the Quran. I mean, this is exactly what you would expect.
Absolutely. I totally agree. Also, it is really problematic thinking back if you look at Genesis and you look at the story, first is the firmament is separated, then the sun and the moon. So there has to already be the earth before there's the sun and the moon. That's the order of creation.
Oh yeah,
so
that's a good point. Yeah, that's right.
Put there, you know.
Well, I think this is an important point. It'll come a little later, but it's an important point that is finally into understanding of power, right? In other words, remember, Copernicus was, although not accepted, he was tolerated, right? He was tolerated. It was actually Galileo that really caused the revolution. Because the revolution, as it was a theory, it's a hypothesis, whatever it is, and that's okay. And the Catholic Church at that time was actually quite liberal. Like they didn't go burn Copernicus. Like he's a rebel rouser. He's going to kill everything, right? So in that sense, once you realize power actually has a way of entering into this argument, then of course, then the whole thing changes, because it became very much about the relationship between how it settles down into a practical world. That's why Venice was so important. And I wish he had spent more time mentioning, Shakespeare. He mentioned it in passing, but he focused on Galileo. But Shakespeare was important because he made the feeling of power as a very important part in terms of individuals' life as well as government, because that's why he runs around going to say to be or not to be, like the powers is in pitching on the understanding that could be, right? So I think power enters the equation before you just accept that, well, that's just the way it is, just be like the Egyptian. The Egyptian had the myth. One of the reason is that, one of the big important thing about Egypt is that the Egyptians do not want to go into death and be annihilated. Death was okay because death was a resurrection, like plants grow and replenish themselves, was annihilation. And so therefore you have to be thankful that you even exist. And if you were not thankful enough, your heart would not have this sort of glorious gratitude for existing itself. And so therefore that was the condemnation. So even if you're living as a very poor person, maybe even a slave, you're thankful that you at least exist. Existence was an important thing. So that wasn't calculated in terms of manipulating power, because it was so well used that it became just sort of invisible, right? And for a long time it just became invisible. And and then you never really had to advance, because actually what's happening backstage, it controls the understanding, right?
Yeah. Anyone have any more comments? I was touched by the gratitude remark. The last funeral I went to was Robert Solomon's, and there was only one inspirational quote on his little funeral card, and it was about gratitude. The proper thing that like the fundamental therapeutic attitude for a human being is to have gratitude. It's like the purpose of life isn't survival, it's love. And having gratitude is like the proper axiomatic foundational thing for an organism to have for its existence. I thought that was very touching, because there's lots of quotes to choose from, and that was the only one that made it onto the playbill for the funeral, or whatever that thing is called.
Well, I'd have to add that that's what Cicero's highest virtue was gratitude, the highest of virtues.
Well, the second important thing about that, and he didn't pay enough attention to that either, was that in Venice, the power actually began to come from the marketplace.
Perfect. Right? Perfect segue. And we're finally in Venice now, and here's the moment. So maybe Galileo. What's that?
Yeah, he's going to bring that. He's going to talk about that structure, that social structure.
That's right. Yeah, because of the marketplace, because business and invention was prioritized, then yes, right. Well, let's make a telescope. So Galileo makes a better telescope, that he makes it even better, and then something important happened. Let's see.
Galileo is the creator of the modern scientific method. And he did that in the 6 months following his triumph on the Campanile, which would have been enough for anyone else. It occurred to him then that it was not enough to turn the Flanders toy into an instrument of navigation. It could also be turned into an instrument of research, an idea which was altogether new to that age. He stepped up the magnification of the telescope to 30, and he turned it on the stars. In that way, he really did for the first time what we think of as practical science. Build the apparatus, do the experiment, publish the results. And that he did between September of 1609 and March of 1610, when he published in Venice the splendid book, The Starry Messenger. What did it say?
I have seen stars in myriads which have never been seen before, and which surpass the old previously known stars in number more than 10 times. But that which will excite the greatest astonishment by far, and which indeed especially moved me to call attention of all astronomers and philosophers, is this, that I have discovered 4 planets, neither known nor observed by any one of the astronomers before my time.
These were the satellites of Jupiter. The Starry Messenger also tells how he turned the telescope on the moon herself. Galileo was the first man to publish maps of the moon. We have his original watercolors.
The day the universe changed is when he saw those little planets going around Jupiter, and then, oh my God, the specialness of the center of Earth, the monopolization of orbit-centeredness no longer belongs to the Earth.
Mm-hmm.
Right, but and it had to be more than one day, because he watched them and he drew them and he watched them and he drew them.
Yeah.
And they kept coming and going, with Jupiter being the middle.
Mm-hmm.
So he had to take these like extended observations, and then at some point he was whack, he jumped out of the tub, you know, Eureka! Like, whoa, it's really amazing.
Yeah, but I really think that he didn't tell enough about the other story, which is power and the marketplace. Because I drew the parallel to Athens. You know, Athens, well, first of all, you know, that Greece colonies extended into Asia Minor, and the Persians were dominating Asia Minor, and some of the Greek state asked Athens to help, and they did help, and there was a rebellion and so forth, and of course the Persian took it back, but what happened was that I think the Athenians burned down certain temples in Asia Minor, and the Persian was going to be a payback, right? The revenge. This little pipsqueak little place that wanted to, in a sense, challenge the power of Persia, right? So first came Marathon. Of course, the Greeks defeated them, and actually the Athenians mostly defeated them in Marathon, you know, the great race, the race at Marathon. And then the Persian withdrew, but Darius, who was the king, he didn't make it in his lifetime. He died before he could revenge. And so his son, Xerxes, did it again. And this time the Greeks the Athenians call on all of Greece to help out, to defend Greece. So the concept of Greece, in some sense, became interesting. Of course, they repelled it, you know, in Thermopylae. And what happened is that in order to mount the campaign, in a sense, Athens was in a center that collected, in a sense, tributes and taxes from the other Greek states in order to distribute and buy ships and all kind of preparation for the invasion. And so what happened was, when they won, the Athenians thought, well, this is a good idea to just have other people keep paying tributes, even though there's no longer a threat. And Aeschylus, the great dramatist, wrote an interesting play. I never read it, but I heard about it. I asked a Greek historian about it. I said, well, how did the Persians feel about that play? Because apparently it went to Persia, to the show, to Xerxes as well as whatever. And she said, no, that's not the important question. The important question was, how did Athens feel about the thing? Because what the playwright, what he said was, you have become too arrogant, and what you're doing, in a sense, is destroying democracy, and you're going to become like the Persian. Because you want to build an empire. Be careful not to do that. And they didn't listen to him. They did not listen to Aeschylus. And what they did was I think it was Pericles, but anyway, the head of the Athenians decided, no, we could win the war if, for instance, the other Greek state got upset, including Sparta, right? So the strategy was, Athens was a naval power, just like Venice. They depend on the trade with other states, other kingdoms, other barbarian kingdoms, whatever. And they thought if they built a wall that extended from Athens down to Piraeus, then even if the Spartans moved to a seas warfare, they could sustain themselves, because the Spartans were not sailors at all. They didn't know anything about sailing, and they could always, as long as they keep the sailing ship moving, they could always resupply. Okay, but unfortunately, what happened was there was a plague that happened, and people beginning to die, and so Sparta actually won the war. So the warning was that because you were arrogant and you want to become an empire, you are destroying the freedom of exchange of ideas that was existing in Athens, and it became a tyranny, okay, that masquerade as democracy. And I think that's an interesting thing, because the parallelism between the trade and the power was reflected in a way in Venice, because the power is beginning to come, because Venice was a sea power that was traded in the Mediterranean, and they became very, very rich. And that began to, in a sense, demonstrate that there was another power center other than religion.
So is there a point there besides saying that Venice was a hub of commerce?
Yes.
And in commerce hubs, you get density of ideas in and out. So you get merchant capital producing new things and creating markets. But how is that connected to the wall
the power structure is not entirely based on anything religious. So the religious center is not the center of power. So this gives the merchants, who are a little more random and competing, and the leeway to allow invention, because they're not regulating and tamping down things. They're looking for benefit for themselves from everything. So it's a competitive marketplace of ideas, in the sense, if you can profit from this spyglass and see who's coming, you have an economic advantage. It's not a religious question. It's like immediate return on knowledge and profitability. So it's a different scale, and religion isn't in there because the merchants have so much control.
No, my point is slightly different. The marketplace began to be dominant because that's actually what the building of the middle class began, because the source of money began to develop in Venice and eventually throughout Europe, so that the middle class began to challenge the old aristocracy of Europe, and that, in a sense, made capitalism the dominant power, even above democracy, well, which is the same thing as Athens trying to use the trading power, sea power, to capture the power of money as the problem. And we're still living with that, right? Because when you realize that it was power that controlled things, it wasn't really even ideas, it was power.
What a perfect segue, because now we're going to talk about how Galileo leaves the merchant and trade-oriented culture of Venice and goes back to Florence with his open mind, expecting there to be other like capital cleansed consciousnesses that aren't so dogmatic and anal. But he forgot what it was like out in the boondocks.
Forgot Florence, yeah, right.
All right, so here we go.
Because what Galileo saw in the sky and revealed to everyone who was willing to look was that the Ptolemaic heavens simply would not work. That Copernicus's powerful guess had been right and now stood open and revealed. And like many more recent scientific results, that did not at all please the prejudice of the establishment of his day. Galileo thought that all he had to do was to show that Copernicus was right, and everybody would listen. That was his first mistake. The mistake of being naive about people's motives, which scientists make all the time.
That crazy show me guy, it didn't play in Rome, huh?
Well, it didn't play at Athens because Aeschylus was telling them the same thing, except with a different kind of power. You're becoming like Persia, right?
Who was it? Was it Socrates that used the phrase "the peculiar unforced force of the better argument"? So Galileo was relying on the peculiar unforced force of the better argument that would just disarm everyone. When you see that 2 + 2 actually is 4, who's going to argue against it? So when you see, look at the telescope, what do you see? Surely your senses are stronger evidence than your childhood education. Surely.
But the authorities won't even look in the telescope. They're like, no, won't even look. I will not look.
That's right. Well, their excuse ultimately was the Catholic Church did apologize 400 years later, right? A bit late. The final argument was like, and they were partially right because in some sense he should have been executed rather than put in a house arrest, because it was
come on, man.
No, it was such a challenge to power that, remember, they accepted Copernicus because it wasn't threatening about power. It was just an idea. There was this idea, there's this idea, and their argument is that slow down, let it penetrate into the society slowly, because we accepted Copernicus, not accepted in terms of like, oh, you're right, but we allow it to be, and you're pushing this thing a bit hard. And we remember the movie with Jack Nicholson as the Marine guy in Guantanamo?
You can't handle the truth.
That's right. You can't handle the truth. The people cannot handle the truth. You're going too fucking fast, right?
So you're suggesting...
Pause. Phil, I have to bring this up as a note to Scott, because that's going to be the highlight of Phil and his little tyrant there. That's going to be, you can't handle the truth. That's going to be the opening to this session here, I think.
Okay, there you go. Yeah, what was I going to say?
Okay, sorry, Phil, go on. Keep going.
No, I mean... So
yeah, the question was, he challenging an astronomy view, a scientific view, a question about motion of planets and stars, or was he questioning a worldview about where we live, who created it, the heavens and the earth in the context of the human significance of God being the regulator and the inventor? So he didn't realize, that he wasn't stepping into a little discussion about the motion of the stars and the planets. He was in a bigger discussion. I don't see where they gave him room to even, keep his view. I'm not sure they allow it. According to one source, they actually, for a while, the Catholic Church adopted the Copernican view and later on reverted to the Ptolemaic view before Galileo, according to one of these online documents. So who knows what they were arguing about? He was dealing with his Pope. He thought would be ready for this information.
Well,
And
he was
a different battle.
Well, he was an intellectual, and he believed that, like, surely they'll understand this and accept it. But he did not understand power enough to understand, no, they're going to shut you up. Just like Jack Nicholson says, Tom Cruise says, give us the truth. And Jack Nicholson realized that I can't give you the truth because that will reveal the backstage power that we're living under, because you can't handle the truth, because it will destroy the power structure we already have.
So
right?
Galileo didn't know enough about religion to make his argument. Whereas, in the movie you're talking about is you didn't know enough about the Marines to make this argument, but the Marines is actually going to be subsumed in a bigger context of society with its values. So too bad to Jack, but here Jack's at the top of the heap.
But then he acted like he understood. So when he wrote his book, he's like, I didn't hold an opinion. I didn't make a claim. This character said something in this fictitious conversation. And yes, he actually followed the rule. He didn't break the rule, but when assholes don't care about following the rules, really.
Well, that's just like Clinton saying it depends on what is, and I didn't have sex with that woman. And, parsing the words, saying I didn't make this argument when he's really setting this up and not realizing that he's going to insult the Pope, who is his only support.
Oh, that's right. That's right. And he makes the Earth-centric person look like a dumbass in the dialogue, which is even worse, I guess. Yeah.
Well, we have that in our politics, right? The Democrats think that surely they'll understand what's right and what's wrong, right? And so they always bring a knife to a gunfight. It's like the Republicans know, no, it's about power. You don't fucking understand. You got to win, right? So in some sense, the Democrats are kind of a little bit closer to, Galileo. He just didn't understand that the deep structure of moving things is really power, right?
That's right. Yeah, he thought that truth and evidence were more important than tradition and authority, or just authority and power, and then that's not true. He didn't realize that these other humans are working with other priorities.
Guys, I want to add a flavor to this. I this came up with the Keynesian philosopher or economist, the post-Keynesian philosopher Steve Kane that I'm talking to. He's got a paper that he's about to release in the next year to the Royal Society, Newton's paper. Something that will be read by all of the Royal Society. He's hoping that it'll change things. Is he hoping that there's going to be systemic change? Yeah. Does he think it's going to realistically happen? Probably not. He says he has a mathematical proof that shows such and such and such. Right? I'm not going to get into it. But let's go back to Galileo here for a minute and think. And I brought up the posthumous factor to this idea, and I equate it to the closest semblance of transcendence that we have, or everlasting life on this planet. And that would be the fact that Galileo knows that his material will live on beyond his years. He realizes that his earthly time is only for so long. What will live past for him, just as it does in this, with Socrates, who lives on to this day as long as people are talking about him. There's the world can change into the future beyond the changing of the guard of the current day power structures, right? And so that same sort of conversation, and I think academics and inventors and people that pursue this Ionian enchantment of scientific endeavor are still, they're aware of this. They're aware that they can stand on those shoulders, right? And so that's what I was explaining to this economist, and he's aware of it. He realizes that the change that may come about related to his work may not happen. It may not happen for 400 years. It may not happen until global collapse before someone starts to look at it, right? So
this is right. Maybe the tradition of art for its own sake, science for its own sake, the tradition of advancing knowledge for knowledge's sake. Religiously, there are arguments, and the question is, well, both sides are arguing. Is this a good argument or a bad argument? Well, is it done for the sake of heaven? You know, is it like they're both struggling for the truth of something and the best, you know? So, yeah, and those get recorded, and it sort of doesn't matter who's winning at any moment, because in the end, you're going to follow out all the tracks and see which ways it really seem to work, right? So you record the arguments along the way.
Well, except I really truly believe this time is different, because they have a right to believe that the world will continue, that life will continue. We are at the moment where we're not actually sure. At least I'm not sure. All right, because we are at the moment that we're going to destroy that thing that actually sustained, and even we don't. I mean, Socrates has been waiting for what, more than about 2,500 years for it to get to this point, which in some sense is actually worse than it was. In the meantime, a lot of people are suffering, right? Even if it actually finally turns out good, even if that's true. I'm not so sure if that is true, but even if that's true, I mean, are we not concerned that a lot of people are suffering because we refuse to let the power take over? I mean, it's like,
I don't get it. I mean, the power's already
either. What's the idea of the power taking over? What?
The power's already in power. What are we going to do about that?
It's going to continue to be in power, at least for a very long time. But in the meantime, I mean, I certainly care about my suffering. I certainly care about other people's suffering, right? So do they not count, or they just really soldiers to the truth, even if they're not seeking the truth? But in the meantime, we will suffer in order for the truth eventually.
So Phil, people couldn't act in unity, concert in the past because they couldn't communicate, and now we can't communicate because we're all distracted. So we still can't communicate. So we still can't unify. So we still can't, create the power of the will of the people particularly easily. It's too easy to get people distracted. And people don't naturally think in rational terms anyway. So it's maybe the same problem it's always been. Mm-hmm. How do you make humankind realize its potential against those odds? Well, you strangle it with water and failing air, and water systems that fail, and you don't feed enough people, and you bring the rising oceans in, and people, millions and tens of millions, 100 million people displaced. A little disease added in, someone will realize, and maybe the people who have their hands on the levers, who are the only ones we seem to be able to, who can act, because you and I don't seem to be doing anything.
Well, but here's the problem. I mean, okay, so Galileo did something. The power eventually reigns in the Catholic Church to a degree. The middle class takes over.
He didn't do it. He stayed home until he died.
Yeah, but what I'm saying, his ideas, but in the meantime, another power structure takes over. The middle class takes over and uses the leverage of commerce to dominate. Just like the French Revolution had this hope of liberating human beings, but it didn't take long for the power structure to take over. I asked this question. Remember the oath of the tennis court? I don't know if I talked about it in this particular session or some other meetup, but the oath of the tennis court was when the middle class, the third estate, refused to surrender because of the delegates, right? They were going to enter the delegates to vote for whatever was going to happen. And I asked, how many people who were actually in the Bastille, in the trenches fighting, as well as the middle class, actually was at the oath of the tennis court? Did the middle class share the power in the oath of the tennis court to the lesser people who were really much poorer? No, they didn't. They wanted to seize power so they could have it. So there's also evil. I mean, it's like, why is that the case? I mean, the displacement of power, it basically means to a certain degree another power structure is going to survive. That's why it lasted so long.
Where do you want to go with that? That power is inevitable, and that if the middle class raises up and seizes power, we get a Robespierrean sort of like revolution, wipe it away and build it up again, and then the power resides back with the meritocracy and the wealthy landowners, and the middle class gets punished. Is that what you're talking about?
No, what I'm saying is this: it's time that, in a sense, at least the Democrats, at least we're trying to save democracy, finally actually bring a gun to the knife fight. And then it's
Amen.
like, oh, really,
Yeah,
really,
yeah, that's
because,
a good point.
Because
We're
power could only be fought by power, and we're about to relinquish the power.
That's
now.
true. Yeah, in a country where gun-worshipping rednecks actually do vote, it's true. Like Rick Roderick said, you have to act a little bit like testosterone poison, asshole, redneck, meat-eating jerk to get those votes on. So if Bernie Sanders got out there and just shot someone a bird, it would win. I think that'd be sufficient because the smart people know that Bernie's right. Anyone who's educated knows that he's right. And these dumbasses who hate education but love power and cruelty would be like, wow, Bernie's a man. Bernie flipped off someone. If only Bernie had flipped off someone, he would have won the election. Anyway, this Rick Roderick, the greatest professor at Duke, the one that was fired because he was so popular, it was a real Dead Poet Society incident they had back in '91. Rick Roderick used to say in class, if you don't understand boxing, you don't understand American politics. I probably mentioned that before, but it was a great line from one of his classes, and we were like, that's right, marketing is important. Like that's what you're saying, Phil, right? You act like an asshole in the fight so you can win the asshole vote. Marketing is important when you do politics. In fact, it might just all be marketing to get the vote.
Bring back the rhetoric. Phil, you like the ancient Greeks. There you go, the rhetoric. Study Isocrates and the throw of the die, the bone die, astraguli.
No, actually, what I'm saying is that I admire Malcolm X as much as Martin Luther King. Martin Luther King was like selling the nice guy. Eventually, the loop of justice will take a long time, but we will rotate back. And Malcolm X says, we want our rights now, and we will fight for it. Right? That's essentially what it is. Like, that's, you also need, and I actually think those twin plays is actually what succeeded.
Good cop, bad cop, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
That's a good point. Yeah, there's actually a real battle involved, and everything that's happened in history and has changed has happened because of real threat of real violence. Rarely does the ruling class sit down and say, "You're right. We're gonna give up some power here. You can just take over." It's every inch has been fought for. Even when the factory workers were unionizing in America, the owners would hire the police and patrons to come down and just murder them. I mean, we're going to read about that in the history books today. I wonder why. But even child labor laws, every little scrap, minimum wage, everything was fought for with real bloodshed.
You wonder if nothing was burned down during the years since George Floyd, if anything would be happening at all, right? You really have to wonder.
That's right. That's exactly right. That's right. Yeah. The media and the America's self-presentation to itself in order to maintain control, the culture industry, the social engineers would like to say that police reforms would have happened anyway. That's the job. The job of the media is kind of like to say, all along, reason has had the upper hand, and it's slowly saturated its way through things. But the answer is no. Without the burning buildings and the protests and all that stuff, there would be no police reform. The police would be murdering black people for sport every day, like they have been for 200 years. Yeah. All right. Well, on that happy note, here's the last little video. Here we go. Let's see here.
Linlithgow, an Englishman.
Brought to the rack, then mounted on the top of it. My legs were drawn to the two sides of the three-planked rack. A cord was tied about my ankles. As the levers bent forward, the main force of my knees against the two planks burst asunder the sinews of my hams, and the lids of my knees were crushed. My lips were shivering, my groans were vehement, and blood sprang from my arms, broken sinews, hands, and knees. Being loosed from these pinnacles of pain, I was hand-fast set on the floor with this incessant imploration. Confess.
Galileo was not tortured. He was only threatened with torture twice. His imagination would do the rest. That was the object of the trial, to show men of imagination that they were not immune from the process of fear that was irreversible.
So power there was, you know, used to temper imagination, maybe a little bit the way, you know, Phil was talking about putting the brakes on the imagination.
Literally.
Yeah, like literally putting the brakes on it. And I mean, other than that, you know, grotesque scene, and you know, you just listen to that voice, and you can hear the sinews and the knees popping, and I can imagine that it's just horrific, right? And I think just coming off of the previous comment about power, it's like, is this what power distills to? You know, I mean, it gets even worse. It can get worse, but you know, like, is this what unchallenged authority actually does? Apparently so.
Yeah, that's why I said that he just glossed over Shakespeare. He finally realized that mankind does not only live in the heavens, in the stars, but he also lives on earth. And this is what could happen to you, because man lives both in terms of the ideas and the ideals, but also he has to live on earth itself. That's the same reason why, by the way, the West progressed, because they saw the practicality of the circle becoming a wheel, not just an imaginary device that you sort of spin the thing in order to reveal the charts of heaven. So I kind of think that he finally realized that his foot was on earth while maybe his eyes or his mind is in the heavens. You know,
yeah, I agree. Yeah, I think, Daniel, your point is really right on. But I think you should amplify it, that this isn't the extreme of power.
Mm-hmm.
This is just the hint.
That's right.
This is just saying there is power. If you want to see power, this other gentleman who can no longer walk and has confessed, he's seen power. Yeah. So now you know there's power in the world. When they really do power, it's totally different. Everyone's dead. I mean, that's it. There's nothing left. There's blood. There aren't families. There are children left, maybe. You know, so this isn't even really power. This is saying, as long as there's power around, you don't have choices. You have to create your own power to protect yourself from this kind of power. That's the challenge of having a government, the kind we call government. This is nothing. This is sheer ad baculum. This is whoever's got the might. It's horror. It's horror.
Yeah, power isn't abstract or ideal. It's bodily injury and bodily threat, and bodies are the things that power operates on. So I'd like to read this paragraph, this super famous paragraph from Foucault, The Opening of Discipline and Punish. So if you think this is exceptional or bizarre, listen to this from the headline of the afternoon newspaper. Despite all this pain, this is a man who was accused of regicide. He was trying to kill the king. So he's they've tied ropes to his wrists and ankles and attached horses to each of the ropes. He's on the ground, quivering, and he's crying, but he's still kissing the cross when the priest brings the cross, which is like the dollar sign today, right? It's the highest authority. He's kissing the cross. And so despite all this pain, Mr. Smith raised his head from time to time and looked at himself bodily. The cords had been tied so tightly by the men who pulled the ends that they caused him indescribable pain. Mr. Smith went up to him. Oh, I'm sorry. I won't use fake names anymore. Monsieur Le Breton went up to him again and asked him if he had anything to say. He said no. Several confessors went up to him and spoke to him at length. He willingly kissed the crucifix that was held out to him. He opened his lips and repeated, "Pardon, Lord." This is from the newspaper, by the way. The horses tugged and tugged, each pulling straight on a limb, each horse held by an executioner. After a quarter of an hour, the same ceremony was repeated, and finally, after several attempts, the direction of the horses had to be changed. Thus, those at the arms were made to pull towards the head, while those at the thighs towards the arms, which broke the arms at the joints. This was repeated several times without success. He raised his head and looked at himself. 2 more horses had to be added to those harnessed to the thighs, which made 6 horses in total. without success. Finally, the executioner, Samson, said to Monsieur Le Breton that there was no way or hope of succeeding, and told him to ask their lordships if they wished him to have their prisoner cut into pieces. Monsieur Le Breton, who had come down from the town, ordered that renewed efforts be made, and this was done, but the horses gave up, and one of those harnessed to the thighs fell to the ground. So the man's body has been pulled for an hour, and the horse is so tired that it's collapsed. So what are they going to do? Just guess. The confessors returned and spoke to him again. He said to them, I heard him. This is the reporter saying this in parentheses. I heard him. Kiss me, gentlemen. Right? This is the human subject confronted with the absolute power of God, which is tearing his body apart. And he says to Big Brother, right? Kiss me, Big Brother. I love you. I conquered myself, right? In the end of 1984, I conquered myself. I loved Big Brother. Kiss me, gentlemen. The parish priest of St. Paul's did not dare to. So Monsieur de Marlacy slipped under the rope, holding the left arm, and kissed him on the forehead. The executioners gathered round, and Damiens told them not to swear, to carry out their task, and that he did not think ill of them. He begged them to pray to God for him, and asked the parish priest of St. Paul's to pray for him at the first mass. So he's like, next week, say hello to my wife and kids. I love you guys. I love you guys. I love you, Lord. Kiss me, kiss me. I mean, it's this madness. So finally, at the end, I'll just read it. Here's the end. After 2 or 3 attempts, the executioner Samson and he, who had used the pincers, each drew out a knife from his pocket and cut the body at the thighs instead of severing the legs at the joints. The 4 horses gave a tug and carried off the 2 thighs after them, namely, that of the right side first, the other following. Then the same was done to the arms, the shoulders, the armpits, and the 4 limbs. The flesh had to be cut almost to the bone. The horses, pulling hard, carried off the right arm first and the other afterwards. Okay, so this is the
children,
yeah.
Children should go to bed now, right?
Yeah, incredible. So this is the normal application of power to the human subject, and this is God. This is God, and we worship.
You guys really think that is a power because it is a real force and real sheer?
Yes.
No, I disagree. And let me just see if that will fly. I think that's just a sheer force, and of course it's a lower level of power. I mean, it's a scary power, but that's more like a force and violence and that real power that we're talking about in our context. Power is something that actually you don't have to do that. I would suggest that would be a real power that we actually needs to be aware of, and sometimes that we don't see because literally we don't see those power that just Michel Foucault showed as an example, and then Scott when lengthy to show. So that's actually obvious, and that's that, and human beings had, but there's a two. I guess what I want to say is we have 2 kinds of power. One is sheer scary power, which I would say it's more like a force. And the other real power is the power of even including vulnerability. Power that is actually, what do you call it? Less seen, unseen. And sometimes you don't even have to show. That's actually I would say the real power. So I would say I wouldn't of course I would not underrate the first kind of power, but I would say in that sense that there's 2 kinds of power. Even in hunter-gatherer or more primitive society, I think, chief or some kind of a leader person, they probably have that so-called power so that they don't have to show force. Because can you imagine if you have to show force all the time? That's not really a power in a sense.
Well, that's why I said, the power of Egypt, right? Where you got them so sort of in such a trance that they are thankful for it, because the real power in that sense is so invisible. They actually like the guy, yes, he's suffering, and he's still not giving up, and he's still kissing the cross.
Right. I think that
he's such a believer that he actually is hypnotized by it, so that he actually is constructed by even a deeper power, which is that I remain a believer. It's like, it's so invisible. I think that's what's being cast in society as well. But they will pull out the guns if it's necessary.
There's a possibility. Gene, are you talking about the power, for example, that the church used over Galileo? They didn't lay him down and hurt him. They just showed him.
Yeah.
We have a power.
You don't have to, especially in, for example, like a Godfather. He doesn't have to always go around and then whack people. He just hints something and they get it. And I would say that's a real power, another level of power that we all know, that we don't necessarily positively see it, but we all know. And another way of saying is that, let's say that man makes history, but women make men, or something like that. And somehow we at least partly that makes sense, because man has this physical brute force of power, let's say force, but there is another feminine side of power that is a real power that sometimes, is more effective. So I think a brute force of power is a lower level of power.
Yeah, and in the stories that have been brought forth, there's something that actually counters every power, and that is the human being ultimately has some ultimate freedom, some ultimate deepest freedom. This guy decided that he was dedicating his heart to what he considered holy, sacred forgiveness, and nothing could take that away. No amount of force of any kind. So the human being has this ultimate freedom, and someone confined in jail or even confined in the Nazi camps can define their own value and make a meaning in their own heart. So there's a certain freedom, even when there's complete compulsion. There's a layer of something like metaphysical. It's a freedom. But Eugene, I think you're talking about in the physical world, how do we, apart from that freedom, how do we get people to give it up? Like, we scare them with actual physical force. We remind them of the force we have. We build structures that speak of that force, and we manipulate those powers in different ways, right? As opposed to...
They're related, yeah. But I would actually say the meaning and the freedom versus power and force, they're slightly two different things. So I was more responding to the power and force, and especially the part that Scott was reading, Michel Foucault. And I wasn't completely talking about the torture and the horse torture that was going on, and he actually triumphed with the sheer human meaning and freedom kind of thing. So they're related, but I think they're slightly different.
Yeah, but I think you're kind of missing my point. That the real power of control is really that you can hypnotize people to such a trance that they actually already believe it. My point is that take the two longest civilization in the world. That would be Egypt and China. They both, in a sense, brainwashed and constructed a system that's so brainwashed that everybody actually believed in it. Whether it's like the harmonious society of filial piety, like honor your ancestors, honor this and that, so everybody lives in a harmonious way. So you construct a society that you can't actually disagree because you actually agree, right? And Egypt is that you are thankful, you are gratitude that you actually exist, and so therefore the maintaining of the pharaoh who actually is there to maintain this sort of transcendental reoccurring thing, everybody believes. So there was no rebellion. Now, when it came down to it, it came down to a rebellion. Then you use the brutal power. I think that the problem is to even get to a point where people actually recognize that they're being hypnotized and they actually believe what they should believe, and they go along with it, and there's nothing. Everything is fine. Like, what are you talking about? I am grateful that the pharaoh is like giving me a gateway to the eternal life through death. I mean, like, actually
that internalization is the point of Foucault's book. Remember, when he brings this story up at the beginning, it's with the sense of nostalgia. He actually he wants to go back to the old days when the barbarism of power was transparent, and you could see, oh, fucking bastards. Or if you're being torn apart, I love you, Lord Jesus. But, so those are the old days. Now, like Gene is saying, with the Godfather is here, you've internalized all the stories. You're policing yourself. Mm-hmm. That's a more advanced form of power, isn't it? You are aware of the panopticon, so you allow your subjectivity to be completely colonized by Big Brother, and because you're never not being watched. What a more efficient system that is! Instead of having to take everyone's body apart, you implant a police chip in them that replaces their own eye with the eye of power.
Wait a second, Scott. Did we talk about this last week, where everyone thinks they have to have a job so they can get a car, so they can pay for the transportation to get to work, so they can have the job, so that they can afford everything that they didn't know they'll need now that they ever have a job and they need to get stuff?
It sounds like it is ridiculous, but it is not, because otherwise how are social going to function? Human beings are going to have to function in a social way, and it could be anything. It could be just a circulating job, car, house, job, car, house. If not, it will be just something else, which is going to do exactly the same thing. It's not about what it is.
Well, I'm just trying to see if we're all necessarily hypnotized, which was Phil's choice of words. And if we do it mindfully, that would be the opposite maybe of being hypnotized by the power and the coercion of it, saying, no, I can see a trade-off and I can choose to do this. We don't do that. We get the job that has the profile, that has the LinkedIn, we don't do the choice thing.
Well, look, what power has the ability to do, particularly in a modern society, is to divide communities, right? I mean, I was always impressed by the guy who made the American Indian movie called Smoke Signals, and he talked about how, in a sense, the people have lost their identities, because when he was growing up, and that probably would be in the 40s and 50s, like every Indian boy, we would play cowboy Indians, and every Indian boy wanted to be the cowboy. No fucking body wants to be an Indian, right? It's like they are so disconnected from the culture that they no longer have a community. I remember when I worked at the Lower Museum of Anthropology when I was a graduate student, because I was assistant photographer. One day I came down and I saw a bunch of Indians. They weren't dressed in headdresses, but I knew they were Indians. And it seemed like they were having a class. So I was mystified by that. And I went and did my work. And then the guy who was supposedly heading the class, he was an anthropologist. He came in. So I asked him, like, what are those Indian guys doing here? He says, oh, I am teaching them basket weaving. They have so much lost the culture, they don't even know how to basket weave. And they have to be taught not by a craftsman who knows the artistry, but an anthropologist that's the only expert left that could give them a trace of who they were. So they were cut off. How about the American Indian schools?
Wait, Phil, is this about being hypnotized, or I lost the connection?
No, you bucked me off too. We were on power, and I had this really great point, and now I'm stuck on basket weaving.
Yeah, right. Okay.
I'd like to say that I agree with what Phil said earlier about hypnosis. But just real quick, I don't mind being hypnotized. In fact, I'm so miserable in my isolation and loneliness that I just fantasize about being like a little Chinese girl raised in China, doing my gymnastics with all the other girls in the classroom like that. I would love some sense of like synchronized swimming, anything. Hypnotize me. I don't care. But as long as it's not evil, super satanic hypnotizing. But I would love to like give myself to the team. I'm dying to find a team to give myself to. I think people are innately pro-social. Is that so? I'm not against hypnosis per se.
You got Ginny laughing. Yeah. Is it that good, Ginny? You're on mute. Tell us how good is he right? It's really great.
I know. You guys are so entertaining. You're so animated and so excited in this discussion. I know. I mean, the reason I have not been able to totally participate is because Thursday is my night with my son. So he comes over with dinner and blah, blah, blah. Yeah. So anyway, but whenever I do listen to you, it's very entertaining. Thank you.
I have something I want to say to Jean as a comment or a reaction to what she brought up about, and then David actually elaborated on. So first I'll start with David, and then I'll move backwards to Jean. So what David was elaborating on was this idea of that circular economy of sorts, where we have the job and we have the materials that we have to buy with the money from the job to, participate in this circular sort of redundancy. And then I think, if I understand what Jean's point was, is that we need this binding social activity in order for society to function, with some sort of like cohesive order, right? This is kind of, I think, the premise that Jean was kind of trying to put forward. Now, I want to advocate for, my good friend Scott, because I think that I'm going a little bit on the side of Scott, who has, it doesn't seem so sometimes, but he has this like hidden optimism that I'm trying to nourish, I think. And I think it is like, I got my first seed of that when he said, well, wait a minute, like if we treat a kid properly and we raise them with like proper love and affection and all the things that they're supposed to have, they will actually turn out to be decent human beings. And then moving back to David and then back to Jean, the points are, they don't have to participate in this ridiculous circular nonsense economy, right? I think Scott told me today, it's like, we don't, get a piece of gold and hand it to somebody. We bury it in the sand and have them go look for it, right? Or in the dirt or whatever else. Now, Jean, my point here is to say something like this. And I don't want this to be like not offensive, but are you not playing into the hand of a conservative mentality, or in a US sort of scenario, like a Republican card, basically? And let me explain that. If I was reviewing with an economist the fact, and imagine a graph, and you have 10% of the population is on, between 5 and 15% of the population is unemployed. Between, say, 30 to 35, 40% of the population is employed, right? Basically, there's 50%, 52% of the population that has no job. They're not unemployed. They're not unemployed. They are people that have enough significant wealth, whether they're retired or whether they're young of age or whether they're middle class, that just say, fuck it, I don't have to go to a job. Who supports them? There's a certain percentage of the population that supports these people, right? And we don't, they don't go around killing people, or they're quite happy to live on the surplus and the backs of other people.
Yeah. What was the comment of Jean's that this connects to?
Well, Jean was basically just saying that we need some sort of like this functions as a cohesive mechanism, to give activity to people.
What functions?
Like this power dispersal, like this.
I was talking about going to work, and then the obligation to have a car so you could always get to work on time, and the cost of the car being a huge part of what you're working for. And then you get a job. She was saying that this is productive.
Let me explain that part. I actually agree. I think we all agree pretty much about, we're having a conversation. I think we all agree. I was basically saying the social cohesiveness, and also even personally, individually, you get up and then you this, and I was basically talking about myth of Sisyphus. You basically, roll this big rock up the hill, and then it goes down, up the hill, goes down. Next neighborhood does the same thing, and then we're having a competition. Basically, that's what greases the wheel to go around, and that's basically human life. But I'm not saying it in a pessimistic way. I basically agree with David completely. So because that's how it is, and we are built in a way, built that way, we can be aware of that, and somehow we can raise out of it in that way without fighting or throwing completely out of it, because we don't need to fight that. We just need to ride it with awareness. So I basically agree with David. I think that's what he said.
No, but Jean, do we need to go to work? Do we need a job of senseless activity in order to keep cohesiveness together? That'd be the
Then
more
what's the?
appropriate question.
I think we can replace going to work and job and something like that with something else, with a more creative social structure and stuff like that. I think there's a plenty of room for that. So I don't disagree. In fact, I think it'll be a more mature and actually a more enlightened way of living is somehow not continuing this level, this so-called pathetic level of repetition. It's still a repetition, and it will be a human form of life, social life, individual thriving and individual working at something again and again and again, trying to actualize or whatever. But it could be the next level. So I completely agree with you, I think.
Oh, I like that. Well, I mean, I really wasn't making an assertion in that case, but I like how you've brought it back there. David,
personally, I try to live my life that way without looking down on other people's lifestyle. People have their level of whatever the place and time that they're born into. So that given that, I think everybody could be aware of what could be changed, and they could thrive for the next level of a little more, I don't know, little more with the eyes open, enlightened or aware, instead of just brainwashed and completely living like amoeba, so to speak.
Well, Lauren, did you want to say something, Lauren? I know you jumped in, and I think we've gone on like a virtual tour of your house and outside in the backyard and all that sort of stuff. Did you want to say hi? She's just waving. Okay.
You're on mute if you. Oh. Anyway, looks like a cool place.
Well, you scared her away. That's great. Thanks. Good.
No, I'm a bit more pessimistic than that, because I grew up in a generation during the Vietnam War, and there was a lot of people who decided the society wasn't for them. They're gonna have communes and all that, and I think that whether we're brainwashed or whether the system is too structured in a way, we eventually have to submit, at least quite a lot of them. And now the young kids are calling us boomers in a negative sense, because so many people have, I would say, bought in or sold out, how you want to put it. But I've seen it in a way, because we were kind of a revolutionary bunch at that time. And I think what happened is that you live in this society, and then you realize, by the time you're 40, you don't have a retirement account, you don't have a saving account. You realize that, wow, like I really spend like 20 years, 30 years living as a hippie. I better get busy and get it together so I could live in this society. And so you turn into this thing that maybe you didn't buy in the sense you show out, but you finally have to submit. Oh, I have to find a job, get whatever, because that's, now you could realize that you actually don't need that kind of money, but you, even at the minimum, you do need some in this society. So in a sense, you fall into this trap. And my thought is like, oh yeah, there's a lot of young idealistic kids, and I praise them for that, no problem. But I just give them time. They will become like this generation boomers.
How timely is your comment? Because right now I'm getting in my Google News feeds, life begins at 40. A top psychologist explores why. And then there's another one, midlife crisis. What's it all about? And these things are popping up in my Google. So apparently it's in the air now. People are wondering, what is this shift that happens when men reach a certain age and they get serious suddenly? Is it a getting serious, or is it like Phil says, is it a reducing of options and putting all your chips on one thing, namely security, or is it something else?
Oh, there's a midlife crisis thing too.
Well, I've always said that in a funny way that I was lucky to have been born and lived in a pretty poor household and a pretty poor. So I never felt that. I never got to a point where I felt like I needed all that stuff. So I was, like able to live on fairly modestly, and because I didn't need to go out and buy more stuff than I needed. And so in a sense, if we all have that attitude that we don't actually need what the market has trained us to do, because what they train us to do is that you have to go shopping in order to actually maintain the economy going.
So you're saying you're not what you're one of the non-hypnotized, is what you're saying.
Well, I'm not hypnotized as much. I'm sure that I do save money. I have enough money that I could live comfortably. It's not as if I could just squander away, but I'm just saying that because I never really needed that much, I was able to save rather than go out there and just consume.
So I'm having trouble distinguishing between the hypnotized and the non-hypnotized. You save because the power of saving is a real thing in our society. It's a recognized force. You know how to wield it and use it. You have some personal agency in this force, but so you're saying you're giving into that, but actually that's not the same as being hypnotized, is it? Because hypnotized is somebody else's power telling you what to do. And on the other hand, you have no control over the financial system. So you are, in a sense, completely giving over to that power as being objective, right?
No, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying I was lucky enough to be born in that situation. Most people will say, oh, poor you, right? I remember when I was a kid, some other Chinese kids around the community would complain about how they're being exploited by their family because they have to go work in the restaurant. And I remember saying to myself, my gosh, at least you have somebody to exploit you. I don't have anybody who's on the upper echelon to exploit me. That's how disconnected I am to the economy. So I was just lucky, partially. Okay. Partially is also because I was not trapped by that. I was able to see that there is another way. I'm not saying I'm so smart. I said, I escaped it like all these other fools and not getting hypnotized. I guess I was never in a point where I was capable as easily hypnotized. Maybe you could put it that way. So I wouldn't necessarily say I'm virtuous. I could say that, but I'm not necessarily saying that I was lucky. I mean, how many people will actually say, God, I'm lucky I was born poor? I mean, that's an amazing thing to say in this society, right?
Only a wise person could say that.
No.
Phil, you said that. So let's take that. Take the wisdom card there. Just say you're a wise man. You say you're born poor, and you're thankful for it.
Well, actually, that's also in my news stream. Studies show that children raised with adversity have higher internal locus of control as adults, and I think that's true.
But on the other hand, it would be the same thing. I was in a condition. Just like if I lived around a very smart people who were talking things, I would just become smarter, even if I'm stupid. But if I was born in a situation where there's just like dumb people, I would not be so smart. So how much of it is really me, and how much is it really that the situation I was in?
But your ability to use the situation is not something I can see that you're particularly given by anyone. That's really, someone could have grown up miserable or more aggressive because they were poor.
I will say this. Once I was a live meeting with a bunch of would-be artists. I call them would-be artists. And the question, it was art and finance or something. And one person, this particular situation, they asked, like, what is it that you really value in life that you can't do without? I mean, which is the part? And this one gal came up and she says, I can't do without my latte. I just blew my top.
Your what?
I blew my top.
Your what?
I blew my top. I went
without your what?
She couldn't do without what? What was it she couldn't do without?
She couldn't do without her morning everyday latte before everything starts.
Latte. Of course you can't do without your latte.
Yeah. Right. Okay. What I blew up is because they don't know anything about how difficult it is to be an artist. And that's the last thing you should do. And I actually said it in metaphorical ways, but they kind of understood it because they got very upset. I said, people should not be allowed to live in Athens till they spend some time in Sparta, because you learn a certain kind of toughness and a certain. I'm not praising Sparta for the virtues. I would not want to live forever in Sparta, but a little bit of toughness will able to sustain you to very difficult situations. I think that character actually belongs to me. That part I would accept, right? Because when I went to college, my high school had a survey, continuous survey. Like one of the questions was like, what was the most important class you had? I would say something like physics, because I was reasonably good at it. And then on my third year when they did that, I actually wrote back. Was it the second year? And that was the second year. I wrote back and said, I suddenly realized it wasn't physics, it wasn't math, it wasn't English, it wasn't any of that. It was wrestling. Right? Because it taught me a certain sustaining stamina, putting your effort into something. And that was a virtue that was beyond education. And I think they never sent a survey to me again. I don't know whether that just ended the survey or whether it's that this guy is such a fucking fool.
Maybe the Greeks knew this. I mean, they were big on
that. I think everyone should do mandatory 2 years military/volunteer service. Like in Korea, we have to spend 2 years in the army, and it just makes you a good character, and you learn stuff, and you interact with people. What if Donald Trump actually really had to suffer 2 years in like a boot camp's volunteer service? Would he be such a retarded asshole today?
Well, my question would be, how many people would put at the high school survey the most important class you had was wrestling? I mean,
only a wise person would put that.
There you go.
I think you might be onto something, Scott, because he wouldn't have run for president if he knew that's his first term in office would have involved a boot camp sort of scenario, right? He would have said, "Fuck it, I'm not doing this."
Well, maybe he would have grown an empathy organ and realized that other human beings are actually feelers instead of automatons.
Don't get carried away. Come on, let's not. This isn't a make-believe channel. Come on now.
I don't know. I think there's an idealization of army life, which would be very different if everyone had to serve. It would be a really different army. The army now maybe fetishizes combat, destruction, whereas if it's a matter of service, right, and the army is used for different things, it's different. I think then people going in the army would not come out fetishizing weapons like they do now.
Well, service, it doesn't have to be the army.
There are way more weapons.
Actually built a community. Yeah, you're right.
There are way more weapons in the United States than there are like adults.
Yeah. Well,
this is reassuring, David. This gives ammunition to the movement that I'm trying to mount with a military-like response to the climate concerns, right?
Yeah. Service for the world, service for your country. Yeah, no, that's a good idea.
That would be great if we could do it, but I think there could be a lot of people who find that rather distasteful.
It's the easiest solution. This is Jameson's Universal Army. Everyone is automatically signed up to the army involuntarily, and so they automatically get housing, healthcare, food. But they also have to, take out the garbage once a week.
It's definitely Mao. It's definitely going to be Red China. They're going to point to socialism. They always do that, So you have to find a way to make it red, white, and blue too, right?
Well, we can do that. We can have sparklers and flags in the background while we talk about the Universal Army, and have maybe some swastikas back there and some nooses to make sure that the Trump supporters are on board.
I object to this swastikas.
Guys, just do it as I gave you that graph earlier, right? That the breakdown of society. You have a certain number of people that are unemployed, right? You have a certain number of people that are employed, and you have a certain number of people that are completely not employed, and they just live off the surplus of everybody else.
Yeah.
So what I'm saying is, like, these guys get to stay doing what they're doing for the most part. I'm like, Scott's saying, well, let's throw everybody into the army. Well, that's not a way to buy the votes. I mean, if you look at say 26 to 36% of the people are covering the entire cost of the entire country, right? And if we have a GDP that's 1/10 of what it should be, we don't need near as many people to actually run supply lanes and keep things moving so that there's food in the grocery stores. We don't need that many people, working the hospitals to make sure that we have proper health care. We don't need that. We just need to remove the redundancy and then let people stay home like they're in a COVID situation.
Are you talking about in the same spirit of a universal basic income kind of thing?
Yeah, but without the traps of falling into the pitfalls that have been put forth of, well, it doesn't work. It worked in this place and this and that, and it's about timing and all this kind of BS, right? Because I don't want to fall into a trap of saying, well, we tried it, didn't work, so fuck it, we're not going to do it. Like, I refuse to go down that rabbit hole. I think it's just silly. It's goofiness.
And it includes service, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's different from just a basic income per se.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, there has to be something there.
It's like a works project, only.
Yeah. Public works. That's right. Yeah, that's the best model, probably.
Get involved with your community, right? I mean, there's a ton of things to be done around in a community effort. In some regard, we could say that this is a community support thing. I mean, at the very least, if nobody watches this beyond the 6 people in the room,
that's
we count
partly because you like base community service, but a lot of people do not like it, and at least a lot of people do like just watch TV or play video game kind of thing. So it's a personal difference, right?
Yeah, but a lot of people don't like to brush their teeth, but they still have to. Otherwise, it becomes like, seriously, at what point do we draw the line here?
There is a difference. If you don't brush your teeth, you're going to have bad breath, teeth fall out. Some people do live like that and they get away with it. Maybe they have a decent life. But the thing is, the public service, that is versus video game, computer game or something like that, that is something that it's just sheer personal preferences, and there is no which is better versus which is less. That's really a personal preference, isn't it?
Well, Gene brings up a good point. How do we draw that line, right? You're gonna have endless debates between David standing up there as the putting forward a bill or a motion to say it has to include service, right? And we're all like, yes. Gene comes up and says, yeah, but some people don't like that. So what do we do? How do we reconcile that?
You have multiple choices. You have A, B, C, and D. I want to work locally, for this project. I want to volunteer to go to a national service to do this kind of thing. I want to work on infrastructure. I have these skills, kind of like variety, yeah.
I bet you the rich people will figure out some cap and trade thing, right?
They'll pay someone
I'll buy some poor guy the service, and then everything's fine because I'm paying him. He's doing his thing. It's cap and trade. What more do you want? That fits in the capitalist system. Somebody will figure it out something to counteract it. Yeah,
you're right. We can't write it like the tax code. You're right, because they'll pay someone $5 a day to go in for them. We can't do what they did back in the Revolutionary War. No.
Well, it's kind of interesting, though. America was desperate to not get involved in the war, even though it was threatened by Germany and all that, until it was really threatened, until our Pearl Harbor got bombed. We got to get revenge, whatever it is. In other words, we wake up when desperate time comes, and people actually volunteer. A lot of people just volunteer.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what's going to happen. It's like the child needs to get imprinted that their hand's burnt. They burn their hand. We need to go through the suffering. We need to go through the pain, and the tipping points have to become realistic to the point that it destroys the fabric of our civilization for us to then to pick up the pieces and go, okay, now maybe we should work together.
Yeah.
Right. And that's the sad thing, because at that point, maybe it's too far gone. That's kind of the thing. It's just the tragic ending of the Greek tragedy. We're writing our own tragedy here.
I'll put a bee in Scott's bonnet about this. Maybe that's because all the things we're talking about are notions based on ideals, And in the Kantian sense, the thing that is the actual evidence is the sensation and the intuitions of actual suffering, of actual pain, of actual disaster in front of you. Without that, it's all hypothetical discussion about this could be this, and there's no reality unless there's the sensation of your connection to the problem. You have to see suffering, your own suffering, someone's suffering you directly connect with. You can't, the pictures of the war in Vietnam made a difference because it was a shocking reality. You have to get it close enough to be real to people. Climate change as a graph is not real to most people.
Yeah,
but people that can't pass the people that win children cannot pass the marshmallow test, cannot be policymakers.
Yeah, and you got to base it on that. You got to base reality on, make it real to people, then they'll sign up.
Yeah, but we have a cure even for suffering. It's called drug therapy. So don't worry about it. And people willingly take something that will harm them because you're having a pretty good time in the meantime. So we figure. By the way, we figured that out partly because of the science, right? So you can't really just praise science altogether. I mean, it's got to be deeper than that because that is a kind of cure, even if it's temporary, right? Drug therapy.
I like Scott's idea. We can make this into some sort of like idolatry. So you have a kid, they're born. Of course, we're going to be limited by the number of kids we have. And what do you give the kid? What do you give the family, your kids that have their kids when, I'm a grandparent or something, and I give my kid a marshmallow and say, I hope this works. I hope it works out. I hope they're a voting citizen. I love that idea, the marshmallow test.
Oh, God. Okay. Well, in case anyone doesn't know, the marshmallow test refers to a test that they use on children to make sure that they have the ability to delay gratification for a higher good. So you tell the child, here's a bowl of marshmallows. You can take one now if you like, but if you wait 5 minutes, I'll give you 10. So kids that are raised in the ghetto, kids from poor families eat the first marshmallow and then they complain. But kids raised in rich families who have self-discipline will sit there for 10 minutes and then get the 10 marshmallows. That's what that referred to. I should have mentioned that.
So I don't think that is the direct point that I'm about to ask is not the direct point. But do you think it is the genetics, or do you think it's actually, you said the ghetto and poor families, do you think it's a more of a
it's environment. It's environment. It's entirely environmental, and they get too okay.
I'm sure it's both, but I always try to err on the side of the environment. I try to err on social constructivism because that's the only way we have any possible power. It could be that we're all naturally biologically fascists, but if you assume that, then you don't try anything. So assume the best, assume maximum social constructivism, and then you actually come up with good engineering policies.
Yeah, I like that. I think it is somewhat of a combination, but I think you have a good point that there is no point if we just say it is nature or if it is, the combination. So I think the whole point is that let's assume this way because that's gonna bring out the best result, right? So I can completely understand it.
Yeah, but I'm thinking there's even something wrong with the marshmallow test because the reward.
I think so.
The rewards you will get more marshmallow.
Lauren.
We had Lauren talk about the marshmallow.
Yeah, but
I finally figured out.
But that test has to be like.
How valid my opinion is over here, but yeah, the way Scott described it, it sounds like there's a problem in the premise, right? So if a child is from a poor family and they have food insecurity, then what good would it do to wait and believe that you're going to get 10 more? You got to grab the food while it's in front of you.
Yeah, that's one problem.
That's actually what I was about to say also, because given the environment, actually they are making reasonable, rational, best outcome.
Yeah, but
it's rational. It doesn't have the control of time, which is the frontal cortex.
No, I accept that objection, but I'm making a different objection. The reward is a problem because you're giving it like the reward of the same thing. You just get more. What you got to do is figure out some way to teach people. And I think this is too abstract. That if you don't do this, this poor kid over here doesn't have any. You got to give him some. That's a harder test then it's then saying, well, you're gonna get 10 more. Like, of course, that is like the reward of heaven, right? You sacrifice in this life, and look, you're selling, you're buying in. Like, oh yeah, I mean, I get the eternal life. Are you kidding me? That's a transactional. That is a transactional reward. You know, so you gotta.
Part of the value of the test, when they did it, was that it tended to correlate to people who had better life outcomes, better SAT scores, better educational attainment, body mass index, and other life measures. So this was just a way to see if apparent ability to delay gratification matched up with certain long-term life experiences that we would judge beneficial.
But does it teach you how to care for others?
Didn't teach.
That does actually get them somehow. Like, if I don't eat this marshmallow, then 10 kids will get a marshmallow.
Phil, you're missing the point. Phil, you're missing the point, though. You're really missing
the point. I'm saying you guys are placing a test that actually, in a sense, reward the thing that's already there. I mean, the system that's already there. It's sort of like it's actually building up the system, right? Because
it also shows your ability to resist what the system is putting in front of you. Like, are you going to become massive in your body, or are you going to like control it because you see a benefit beyond that? Are you going to like bother with the academic stuff because it's such a pain, or are you going to like, okay, I'll do it because of, I can see beyond the pain to something? It's just saying these are correlated sorts of abilities. That's all it's saying.
Well, but you also are saying that in some sense, the people who are on top deserve to be on top, because that's why they get the 10 marshmallows.
Well, it's sort of saying who's going to get on top in a certain way.
Yeah, okay. But it's the wrong reward is what I'm saying. Because it's reinforcing the system we're already in.
Well, it may mean you can choose your own reward.
Okay. Maybe that's a little bit better. There's multiple choices. It's like, okay.
I wouldn't really want to apologize for the Stanford guy that did it, but there are a lot of ways to read this thing. It's indicating something. It's interesting.
I think, Phil, that you're saying that there's you just have to look at the test and say the test was designed to show one specific thing.
Okay.
You could take it and say, I could design, 375 different types of tests that show different types of things with different variables, and go ahead, try and set it up.
No, I accept that limited perspective. That's true. It does show that.
I mean, the downside was that when they repeated the experiment, apparently half the effect seems to have been explained correlate to economic well-being, which brought up what Lauren was saying. To some degree, you're pressured to learn to go for immediate responses when you're in a deprived situation. So there's a lesson about upbringing and whether we care for our children in a certain way.
Which goes to Scott's point earlier that we should have a system that nurtures children and doesn't relegate them to a lifetime of disadvantage, right?
Hedonistic fear and inability to control their impulses because they're constantly trained to be afraid of waiting for gratification, right? If you treat children well, they will have the ability to choose what they're going to do as opposed to the impulsive need being stronger than their will. So, right. It's a good, bring up the children. I mean, that's a good lesson.
So where does it go? Is it a Nietzschean response to say, what happens if we go the other way and encourage everybody to give in to their immediate responses? Fuck the planet.
I don't know.
Everybody take one marshmallow. Fairsies, right?
Yeah.
It's good enough.
Take it and eat it now. Take the immediate. Take the immediate. Fuck the planning.
I actually think there is a human. Well, I don't know anything about it, but my impression of living 50 years on Earth is human beings have this unique ability to delay gratification, and with my extremely limited knowledge, I think it is. I would venture out to say that it's a universal virtue, because of course it's a culturally related, and also depending on what kind of environment you're in, it will, of course, it all mixes in. But there is this human dignity and human ability, and animals cannot do that. Maybe squirrels could do that. I don't know, but I would say human beings have what it means to human is just part of it is just that, to where we can go beyond our immediate gratification. That's part of, I think, what defines human beings as human beings.
I like that universality. Yeah.
Well, you know, I have something that might be sort of somewhat of a counter argument, but it probably isn't. You know, they've shown that immigrants, the first generation, they tend to do better. They tend to do better because they have suffer, and maybe the suffering itself is not about the brain, but they now understand what delayed gratification because the mere forces that force them to delay. And when they finally come to the land of plenty, they are used to being delayed. And so therefore, in a sense, they are more successful. Where the children, like, life is good, why delay? You know, I mean, which is a different kind of thing. So which goes back to me, like, because I was born poor, I've been delayed gratification. I've had that delay for my whole life, and so why even not sustain it? So
are you putting yourself in the first generation group or the second generation group?
Oh, I am the first generation because I was.
That's opposite. That was the opposite. You're saying you have the deferred gratification. Okay, I see what you're saying. Yeah, I'm not sure how that works out because there's a. I don't know that that's really what the study's doing, because if you talk about first generation being more successful, what's your metric? Are you saying earning more, being more aggressive, being more capitalistic, material oriented, and the second generation?
No, I mean,
I
think successful in a diverse way, and I don't mean that every immigrant is gonna leap to the top, to the smartest, whatever. But for what the capabilities are, they generally tend to be a little bit better than they would be if they were not brought into this environment, because they're used to delay that they didn't choose, but they understand what delay is, and so therefore they're used to that environment. Yet now they have a place where delay adds a surplus. So maybe it's just simply the smart guys understand, hey, I'm suffering too much. Maybe I ought to go somewhere else.
You might be saying the opposite of what the study would have said. Is that what you're saying? Because if you come in here poor and deprived, presumably, like Lauren said, you're going to take the first marshmallow. You haven't learned safety, so you don't have the skill of deferring. You have the desperation of need as your will enacting, principle.
No. That's actually not what I'm saying. I'm saying that you have this forced delay, and now you're in a land of plenty, and that you don't have to like grab the first thing. You said, oh, that's a lot of stuff here. This is enough for now, right? So I'm going to put this away, not because I'm forcing myself. Oh, I need delayed gratification. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's a possible.
So Phil takes the one single marshmallow and puts it in his pocket and says, "I'll eat it later."
Yeah, no, you're right. No, right. No, you give me 2 marshmallows. That's probably what I would do. Like stuff. Because generally, it's interesting. I find that when I'm served a meal, I generally like to save the best stuff to last.
Yeah.
Rather than eat the first thing and then like, I really don't like this other stuff anyway, so like forget it. You know what I mean? It's like, that's interesting. I find that in myself, and it's sort of like, it's more of a kind of emotional or whatever, whether intellectual choice, because I could easily argue, what if I fell ill or die the next minute, then I delayed it too much.
Right. I got an idea I want to throw out to you guys here. Okay, so here's the storyboard. It's a Christian sort of brainwashing of sorts, right? So basically, what I'm saying is it comes down to a pain pleasure apparatus or psychology. So the idea for delayed gratification is, in our culture, is at least something that works like this. It says, yeah, I can delay the gratification, which is immediate, which I know is good, but I'm going to do something. I'm going to suffer now, regardless of whether suffering is really the lack of eating a marshmallow, but there's enjoyment. So it's like the lack of the enjoyment. I'm going to not experience that goodness right now, but I'll have it at some point in the future, right? Now, it seems that we have more of a polarized psychology or culture, hegemony, I guess, that emphasizes this kind of thing, right? And then going back to what Phil was saying earlier, and he, just like myself, I like to return to the Greeks, had a more holistic sort of approach. So it was like not in excess of anything. So it's like, kind of like, how do we find that golden mean? So it wasn't so much like, tell the dominated or the subjugated class that this is what you have to do in order to, integrate in our society. You really need to follow this kind of delayed gratification narrative and which is built on the foundations of suffering or the lack of, to like some sort of promised land sort of concept. Are you guys with me? Does it resonate at all?
Yeah.
This is Nietzschean sort of view of manipulating people by telling them the rewards are coming later. Don't worry about feeling comfortable in your current life. Keep listening to me. Is that sort of?
I didn't quite think of that, but yeah, I mean, possibly. What do you think, Scott?
I didn't understand what you were saying.
No, most of the time you don't, right? So
he has a delayed reaction. Don't worry about it. No, to me, it really reflects what I said about you should not be allowed to live in Athens until you spend some time in Sparta, because that, in a sense, creates a kind of like, a lack, so that you have the fortitude to hold on to yourself. And the delay, therefore, is not just like you're going to have more marshmallows. You could delay and save it for something that's even better than that, which is like the exchange of ideas, as an example, right? So in other words, that's why I'm saying, like, if you just say, I'm going to get 2 marshmallows, I'm going to get 3 or 10, that's repeating the same thing. Now, if you could save it and just switch the category, because that's why I sort of said multiple choice is at least a little bit better, then in a sense you have to say, oh no, the delay is for something even better than just more. I mean, it's like just better.
Let me come at this from a different angle. It's a different point. If you have a situation, we could recognize that there was a universal acceptance that we could actually feed everybody on the planet. We could provide everybody with we actually had the means to do it, right? But there's a certain group of people that say, actually, that's not a good idea because we don't want to give people that much freedom. We want to subjugate them. We want to keep them down. We want to have them, experience this sort of like suffering. So we don't want to give them too much rope. Otherwise, they're not going to know what to do with it. They're the plebeian class, right? We don't want to do that.
I don't know if you're on the same.
What's that?
I don't know if you're on the same.
What?
Go ahead, David.
No, Gene, go ask your question.
I don't know if you're on the same page, but it doesn't have to be somebody else or some other entity manipulating and directing us people, because people, I think, individually have a built-in psychology to where they want to, hope is a happiness, or pleasure is what is happiness, what is well-being. It is not necessarily a pleasure. Yeah. It is getting close to pleasure, or it is getting close to the goal. So it's more like a hope. And human beings, I think, need hope. And if we have so-called enough, I don't think it is even possible. People will not ever just not have a desire or just totally satisfied, because if you have 1 million, you want 2 million. If you have billion, you want another billion. So that's built in psychology. Just always 10% more, or just more and more and more. So it is not even possible. So we will always have this desire and hope to have more. I think that is not even just pathological. I think it is actually a healthy thing. It's a matter of how to harness that tendency, how to harness that desire. It's not about getting rid of that desire. I think we will just die and nihilistic if we don't have that. In fact, I cannot even imagine. Maybe Dan has something else in mind, but that's my response to where we need hope, and hope is our desire, is our strength.
I think
that's right. Pro-capital people bring up the argument that human beings are naturally lazy, welfare moms to be, and they need poverty in order to give them a little impetus to get off their lazy black butt, to get out there and do something. And it's just not the case that humans will sit around and not do anything. Just they'll leave their house. I mean, animals just wander around because they're programmed to seek alterity because they might learn something. Something that's built in. So I agree with Gene. I don't think this. It's one of those myths that the right use, along with the tail of aggression. There's also the tail of the lazy grasshopper, and those are both ideological weapons and not sociological conclusions.
No, and I want to add another thing that it is difficult to figure out or discern is that the hope and desire and the passion can also be mixed with something seemingly that looks like it is not. It is laziness that looks like it is laziness. For example, if housewives, when they have a lot of other appliances that they don't have to work all the time, then basically the TV watching, the soap opera watching time goes up. And for guys, a lot of times when they have extra time, video game goes up. So it looks like it is people want to be lazy and sit around, and partly it is true, but also in their spirit, with this lazy sit around spirit, there is a place for hope and passion. So they're kind of mixed, and depending on how to parse apart, they're kind of mixed. So I think it is also extremely difficult to separate one from the other because it is mixed.
No, I have a theory that just came up. Well, not just came up, but it's buried in my mind, is that we have overplayed the idea of measurements. That we think that somehow quantity could displace quality. I think that's what part of the problem is. That's why I object to the marshmallow thing. It's like if you could have 10. That's obviously qualitative better than if you just have one. But I was pointing out that part of the thing is that maybe you deny the one so you could have a better quality that's the same amount. And I think measurements have reduced things that's qualitative rather than just putting in the quantitative. And then that has something to do with exchange of money and just measurements in general. We can't quantify it. We can't qualify it.
I agree with your critique. You're making a critique of that experiment because psychological experiments are carried out, on shoestring budgets, and they're, trivial things to measure simply. So they measured 1 versus 2 marshmallows. Literally, that's all they measured. But the idea was more versus less as a kind of, test whether you could make that difference and wait a period of time. And that's a very general question. It doesn't have to do with what you're waiting for. It means, can you wait for something that you necessarily in this experiment is desirable? No one seemed to be uninterested in marshmallows. So given that they had the basis for making such an experiment, it seems reasonable, right? Kids are eating marshmallows. I mean, yeah, I don't even like them, but as a kid, I would eat marshmallows. Yeah, it's great. I would even think 2 is better than 1. So seems like a way to measure something. You may not like measuring things quantitatively, but it's the way they do this kind of hope science stuff.
I gotta put a bee in Scott's bonnet again, because he had a really good I'll call it a rant, but that's not even what it was. He had a really good elucidation earlier on today in class. Scott knows what I'm talking about. So remember when you gave the analogy of going to the fridge and the programming that was running at that point in the fridge, the program that was running to look and say, okay, here's the food, I have this, I have that. The probability calculator makes that potential choice. That's all we're putting up. So I want to pass it to Scott, but I think that's really all the experiment was designed to do is to say, here is this simple calculation. There are instances where it is just a 1 or a 2. There are instances where it's a qualitative a calculation. There are instances where the calculation is much more complex, right? So, Scott?
That's right. Yeah. Dave made a good point, because you have to reduce variables in order to do an experiment, and you have to make some assumptions. There are always going to be exceptions. The assumption here is that more is better. I think that's a fine assumption. Phil made the hilarious point that you could have a super smart kid that was on a diet or on like a no carb diet, and he was like, actually, I preferred to not tempt myself with holding 10 marshmallows. So because I'm aware of my vulnerability, I'm actually going to choose a single marshmallow because I'm on a diet. That's actually a good point. And as far as reducing quality to quantity, I think that's true, Phil, except in the realm of money. In the realm of money, a pure quantity difference really is the qualitative difference. And everything else, quality is quality. But I think, yeah, when it comes to money, maybe money is the only thing where more is always better than less. I don't know.
Well, ancient societies to use marshmallows for money, then you have that confusion.
No. That's not true, because I forgot his name, but the guy who was a very, very respected finance person, like one of the top people, Berkshire Hathaway, was his thing, and he bought a lot of Coca-Cola. Okay, I'm not even going to say that it's qualitative, but in the mind.
Yeah, you're talking about Warren Buffett, right?
Warren Buffett, that's right. And he said, oh yes, of course, you could always depend on Coca-Cola because it's been around and people trust it and they believe in it. So it's not even quality, but what people believe is quality. He said, okay, so if they raise the price by 5 cents for a cup, he's putting in the bet that Coke would survive, because like most people would say, oh, would you rather have Coke for extra 5 cents, or would you rather have this other dubious cola for cheaper? And he says, I'm going to bet with Coke. And that's not even the superb quality, but what is believed as quality, right? And so, yes, he says quality actually does matter in his thought experiment. Maybe he didn't try it. And so he's making a lot of money betting on that fact that actually people will choose quality, even though they have to pay more money, right? Quantitative, like more money is draining out of them, but 5 cents. Now, maybe if you can say, well, it's going to call you twice as much, a lot of people.
But that's just branding. Yeah, I don't know if that's a good example, because they did an experiment where they took regular potato chips and they just increased the price. It was the same chips, and people were like, "Ooh, gourmet," and they preferred the more expensive chips. Yeah. This is.
Oh yeah, the wine objectively is reported to taste better when it's charged more per bottle. Yeah. So I mean, Scott's point about the money is, seems to hold true here.
Guys, I think Scott's point holds true about the money is absolutely correct, but not for the reasons that you're talking about. Scott's point about the money was that it's purely quantitative, right? So your bank account number goes up. That's, $10 in the bank account is not as good as $20 in the bank account. Right. Whether you assign arbitrary value to, whatever somebody's selling you, that doesn't matter. It's just that, 20 is better than 10. In terms of money, in terms of a bank account,
but only if you believe it. In other words, what if Bitcoin? Now, I don't believe in Bitcoin. What if Bitcoin become another measurement? You say, well, you could rather have $20 or you could have 20 Bitcoin.
No, Phil, you changed the subject. You have 10 Bitcoin or 20 Bitcoin. It's always better to have 20, unless you're paying taxes. Then you have to pay taxes on the capital gains.
No. If you're going to reduce everything just to quantity, yes, I'd rather have 2 Cokes than 1 Coke. Yes, that's right. But you did figure in the quantity, and it's not even quantity. I remember very distinctly when Coke finally, after years of being pestered by Pepsi, because the double-blind experiment proved that people prefer Pepsi in a double-blind test. Okay, so they put out new Coke, which is like when a double-blind test. It was even better than Pepsi, right? So they tried it, and people hated it because of nostalgia, right? Oh, you stole away my youth when I used to go out with my boyfriend or girlfriend. We have this wonderful thing, and so people demanded. I still think it was.
That's right.
there was a tricky advertising brand that they put out the new Coke to convince people that the old Coke was better.
That may have been a very super clever move. And that, by the way, that was the invention of the classic moniker. Now there's all sorts of classic bullshit. But the bullshit move of calling last week's Coke formula classic invokes like classic cars and your grandfather and all that. What a brilliant move that was.
Classic dollars. We should have those too.
Well, talk about brainwashing through nostalgia, right? Yeah.
I want to suggest the difference between means versus ends. Money is always means versus your memory, Coke memory, whatever other things are ends in itself. It doesn't have to be in itself always, but money is always means. So
people take money. But Gene, don't people take money as ends when they act?
That's the problem, because it's always means, and people think it is ends. That's where the confusion and the misfortune come from. Because
but isn't it what people do that determines whether it's a meaning or end? So if people take it as an end, that makes it an end. The number in their bank account was the end. That makes them satisfied. They wanted that number.
They are deluding. What I'm saying is they're deluding themselves. They think it's there, paradise is there, but no, sorry, it is not. You were deluding themselves. You should have known it better.
I think you're being philosophical here.
Well, I like the misunderstanding of mean, because I think money is mean.
Mean, yeah, just plain mean.
Right.
Oh, by the way, and that perversity of treating money as an end, I think that's precisely how Marx demarcates capitalism from pre-capitalist cultures. In pre-capitalist cultures, the M was just a mediator between C and C, between banana and squirrel. So it was just like you have gold rather than squirrel meat or bananas, because squirrel meat and bananas rot. That's the whole purpose of gold. That's the only purpose of it, or seashells or glass beads. But with capitalism, the world turns upside down, and now the money is the end, and what used to be the end, which is the meat that you could eat, the banana that you can eat, now becomes a means that you stock up and then have a distribution system, and your goal is to accumulate capital, and that's the beginning of this madness.
And money earns money, so it's a means to the ends of more money. It's very, very perverse. I agree with you, Gene. But maybe we have to recognize that is part of the pure abstraction of money, that as soon as it's abstracted, that can happen.
Well,
we reified it into something, and now we have to deal with the fact that it's a potential object for an end.
Well, partly it become more so when they took away from the silver standard. I mean, this silver was also a mean, but at least it was a physical subject.
I don't think it makes a difference. I don't think that makes a difference, because you can speculate it, you can accumulate it. It doesn't feed anybody,
No, there's a limit to there's a limit to accumulation of silver or gold.
And Bitcoin too. It's all the same.
Yeah, I would say in this context, I mean, you can argue it different ways, but in this context, basically, it doesn't make a difference, because we're talking about exchange power. So
turned into a thing. Yeah. Maybe they'll answer that next week.
Well, this has been a good variety of topics. We maintain energy and enthusiasm to the end. That's the most important thing, is to have happy people together having a happy conversation.
Happiness.
And it is free. We didn't have to pay much. Maybe Dan has to pay like a little money and all that, but this is this is the end. It's not mean, it is end.
I pay twice as much, but thank you. Cheap at half the price.
It's my pleasure. We love doing this, and if for anybody that keeps coming back, we want you to actually think post however many episodes that we have left.
Yeah.
Put out suggestions of what we should do for our next focused series, right?
Yeah. Okay. We're at the halfway point now, so already anxiety is on the horizon.
The days are getting shorter again. Not yet.
Well, so is this a mean or is it an end? Since we're getting anxious,
it's a mean end.
There's a great the learning company great course. It's called, I think it is Big History or something like that. I will look into it again. But so there is this series, 30-some lectures series that is called the Big History. I don't know. I'll look into it. And that's also a macro history from prehistory, start of the physics to the future kind of thing. Yeah.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Phil.
Bye. Thanks, Gene and Phil.
Lauren, thank you.
Hey, Lauren, how's it going?
Good. How are you? That was a fun dinner party.
Oh, good. Yeah, now we have the room all to ourselves. Look, we're all by ourselves now. It's just me and you.
Fantastic. It was